Why did you kill John Lennon?
I thought by killing him, I would acquire his fame.
John Lennon, the iconic musician and peace advocate, remains etched in global memory not just for his illustrious career, but also for his tragic and untimely demise. Delving deep into the circumstances surrounding his death reveals a mosaic of events, influences, and tensions. This video unravels the myriad reasons that converge, making us ponder why someone would kill such a celebrated figure. The global impact of John Lennon's music. John Lennon, as a member of the Beatles and later as a solo artist, wove an intricate tapestry of music that transcended borders and cultures. His songs became anthems of an era, reflecting societal changes, hopes, fears, and dreams. From the streets of Liverpool to the far corners of the world, his music resonated deeply, causing not just a sonic ripple, but a socio-cultural revolution. In the early days with the Beatles, Lennon's music tapped into the youthful exuberance of the swinging 60s. Songs like She Loves You and I Wanna Hold Your Hand offered upbeat, catchy melodies that resonated with the optimism of the era. But it wasn't just the buoyancy of the music, it was the universality of the themes. Love, joy, heartbreak, and hope were emotions everyone, regardless of their origin, could understand and relate to. As the Beatles evolved, so did Lennon's songwriting, growing more sophisticated and introspective. While his early works ignited the flame of Beatlemania, his later compositions painted deeper, more introspective narratives. In My Life, for instance, is a poignant reflection on the passage of time, while Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds ventures into whimsical, almost surreal territories. These songs and many others showcased Lennon's ability to tap into the zeitgeist of the times, giving voice to the silent ponderings and vivid imaginations of a generation. Lennon's music also played a role in bridging gaps during the Cold War. Despite being largely banned in the Soviet Union, bootleg copies of Beatles records found their way into the hands of the youth, bringing a taste of the Western world and ideals of freedom. It wasn't just about the music, it was about the ethos it represented. For many behind the Iron Curtain, Lennon's music became synonymous with liberty, dissent, and the hope for a brighter future. Beyond the Beatles, Lennon's solo career delved deeper into socio-political issues. Imagine. Arguably his most iconic solo track envisions a world without borders, religions, or possessions, where people live in harmony. It became more than just a song. It was an anthem for peace, a clarion call for unity in a world mired in conflict and division. Such was the power of Lennon's music. It could make listeners pause and reevaluate their worldviews, dreaming of a utopia where love reigns supreme. Yet Lennon wasn't just about utopian dreams. He was profoundly aware of the struggles of his time. Songs like Working Class Hero addressed the social disparities and the disillusionment of the lower classes with stark, biting honesty. He wasn't afraid to criticize, to provoke thought, or to challenge the status quo. This audacious spirit in his music made him not just a musician, but also a social commentator, a voice for the voiceless. Lennon's outspoken political views. John Lennon was never one to shy away from expressing his opinions, particularly when it came to politics. His journey from the early days of the Beatles to his later solo years saw a transformation from a pop star to a passionate advocate for peace, civil rights, and societal change. This transition, while endearing him to many, also made him a polarizing figure, often bringing him into direct conflict with establishments and sparking widespread debates. The late 1960s was a turbulent era marked by the Vietnam War, civil rights movements, and a global call for peace. Lennon, deeply affected by these events, began using his platform to voice his opposition to war and violence. His and Yoko Ono's famous bed-ins for peace in Amsterdam and Montreal were avant-garde protests against the Vietnam War. By inviting the press into their honeymoon suite, they cleverly used their celebrity status to direct the world's attention to the message of peace. Their intent was clear: to promote non-violence and to question the necessity of war. Give Peace a Chance, recorded during the Montreal bed-in, became an anti-war anthem, capturing the sentiments of millions who were disillusioned by the prolonged conflict in Vietnam. Its straightforward message and catchy chorus made it a rallying cry for peace demonstrations around the world. But Lennon's political engagement wasn't limited to the anti-war movement. He was also deeply involved in the civil rights movement, especially after moving to New York in the early 1970s. His song, "Woman is the Nigger of the World," stirred controversy with its provocative title, but it also highlighted the plight of oppressed women worldwide, drawing parallels with racial discrimination. By aligning gender and racial equality, Lennon showcased his understanding of interconnected social justice issues. His association with prominent activists such as Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman further solidified his position in the political landscape. These associations, while strengthening his activist credentials, also drew the attention of the U.S. government. His open criticism of the Nixon administration and his potential influence on the youth made him a person of interest to the FBI. Lennon's outspoken nature also led to confrontations with the British establishment. His returning of the Member of the Order of the British Empire, MBE medal in 1969, was a clear denouncement of the UK's involvement in global conflicts and its support of the US in the Vietnam War. This act was not just a personal statement, but a symbolic gesture that amplified his dissent. Lennon also used his music to comment on the state of British society. Working Class Hero stands out as a critique of the class system and societal structures that perpetuate inequality. In it, he discusses the alienation felt by many in the working class, challenging the promises of upward mobility in a system that often seemed rigged against them. His influence on the peace movement. From the realms of pop stardom, John Lennon emerged as one of the most influential voices in the global peace movement of the 1960s and 70s. While many artists of his time commented on the socio-political landscape, Lennon's engagement went beyond mere commentary. He became an active participant, aligning his celebrity with causes that championed nonviolence, understanding, and unity. One cannot discuss Lennon's influence on the peace movement without mentioning the iconic song. Imagine. Its lyrics painted a world without divisions, be it nations, religions, or possessions. The vision of a united world living in peace resonated with millions. Imagine was not merely a song but a global call to action, urging humanity to rise above its divisions and to come together as one. Its lasting impact is evident as it continues to be an anthem at peace rallies and events, even decades after its release. Lennon's commitment to the peace movement wasn't just verbal. It was deeply symbolic and often theatrical. His and Yoko Ono's bed-ins for peace were masterclasses in non-traditional protest. By inviting the world into their honeymoon suite, they created a spectacle that the media couldn't resist. Instead of the typical celebrity story, reporters were met with a couple discussing peace, effectively transforming a personal event into a political statement. This innovative form of peaceful protest underscored Lennon's belief in non-violent resistance and his ability to harness media attention for a noble cause. The peace movement was multifaceted, addressing not just war but also the societal structures that enabled conflict. In songs like Revolution, Lennon expressed skepticism about violent uprisings, suggesting that true change came from a shift in consciousness rather than bloodshed. While he recognized the need for societal transformation, he consistently advocated for peaceful methods of achieving it. The global reach of Lennon's message was not limited to Western audiences. His advocacy for peace and his critiques of war transcended cultural and national boundaries. For many across the world, especially those living in regions torn by conflict, Lennon's songs became a beacon of hope. His belief in the power of love and understanding offered an alternative to the narratives of hatred and division that often dominated global politics. Lennon's influence extended to his peers in the music industry and other artists. His unwavering dedication to peace inspired others to use their platforms for similar advocacy. Collaborations, such as the Concert for Bangladesh, which he indirectly influenced, became templates for how artists could rally for humanitarian causes. Lennon demonstrated that music, when combined with activism, had the potential to effect tangible change, galvanizing fans and the general public to engage with pressing global issues. the controversy surrounding his comments about religion. Few artists in history have been as candid and unabashed in their views as John Lennon, and it was this very forthrightness that often landed him in the midst of controversies. Perhaps one of the most significant controversies of his career was stirred by his remarks about religion, specifically his comment about the Beatles being more popular than Jesus. It's a statement that echoed globally, inciting outrage, debate, and even boycotts. In 1966, during an interview with journalist Maureen Cleave for the Evening Standard, Lennon made a casual observation about the decline of Christianity in the modern world. His statement, taken in its entirety, was an assessment of how youth were engaging more with popular culture, using the Beatles' popularity as an analogy. Lennon remarked, "Christianity will go. It will vanish and shrink. I do not know what will go first, rock and roll or Christianity. We're more popular than Jesus now." However, when this interview was later quoted in an American teen magazine, the context was largely ignored, and the focus centered solely on the provocative claim of the Beatles' popularity surpassing that of Jesus. The backlash was swift and intense, particularly in the United States. Radio stations banned Beatles music, records were publicly burned, and threats were made. The uproar wasn't just limited to devout Christians. Many saw it as a display of arrogance by the already globally dominant band. Lennon, known for his candidness, was taken aback by the intensity of the reaction. He found himself in a position where he had to clarify his comments during a press conference in Chicago, emphasizing that he wasn't comparing the band to Christ in terms of importance or value. Instead, he was commenting on the shifting dynamics of society and the waning influence of organized religion among the youth. This incident, while being one of the most publicized, wasn't Lennon's sole foray into the realm of religion. Throughout his career, he often touched upon religious themes, sometimes with reverence, sometimes with critique. His solo song, God, is a testament to his personal journey with faith. In the track, he videos many things he doesn't believe in, eventually culminating in the line, "I just believe in me, Yoko and me." This introspective take on religion and belief systems showcased Lennon's evolving spiritual perspective, one that leaned more towards personal faith than organized religion. The FBI's interest in Lennon. The relationship between John Lennon and the United States in the early 1970s was a tapestry woven with music, politics, and intrigue. Lennon's political activism, particularly his vocal opposition to the Vietnam War and associations with radical left figures, drew the scrutiny of the U.S. government. At the forefront of this attention was the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, which saw Lennon, with his immense popularity and influence, as a potential threat to the Nixon administration. The FBI's interest in Lennon wasn't a spontaneous development. By the time Lennon moved to New York City in 1971, the U.S. was deeply embroiled in the Vietnam War, a conflict that had polarized the nation. Protests were erupting across the country, and the Nixon administration was keen on silencing or at least monitoring vocal critics of the war. Lennon, with his global platform and recent track record of anti-war activism, naturally caught their attention. Lennon's association with individuals like Jerry Rubin and Abbie Hoffman, both of whom were known for their radical views and protest activities, further deepened the government's suspicions. His involvement in events like the Free John Sinclair rally in 1971, advocating for the release of the jailed anti-war activist and poet, showcased his intent to use his voice and influence to challenge the establishment. As a result of these associations and activities, the FBI began compiling a dossier on Lennon. This wasn't merely a collection of public statements or song lyrics, it was an intensive surveillance operation. Agents were assigned to monitor his movements, tap his phone calls, and report on his daily activities. The surveillance reports detailed everything, from his political activities and meetings to the mundane aspects of his personal life. The FBI's growing file on Lennon wasn't just for information gathering. It played a role in the USA government's attempts to deport him. In 1972, Lennon faced a battle to remain in the country, with the Nixon administration keen on removing what they saw as a problematic figure in an election year. The official reason for the deportation order was a prior marijuana possession charge in the UK, but many believed, and subsequent document releases confirmed, that it was Lennon's political activism that was the real driving force behind the efforts. The deportation battle became a public spectacle, with Lennon and his legal team highlighting the political motivations behind the move. Supporters rallied around Lennon, viewing the deportation attempt as an infringement on his rights and a blatant act of political persecution. After a prolonged legal tussle in 1975, Lennon was granted permanent residency in the U.S., marking the end of this contentious chapter. Tensions in the late 60s and early 70s. The late 1960s and early 1970s were a period of monumental change, both globally and in John Lennon's personal life. The world was gripped by a swirl of transformative movements, wars, political upheavals, and cultural revolutions. Amid this backdrop, Lennon himself was undergoing significant transitions. From a Beatle to a solo artist, from a young man to a matured voice of activism, and from the private comforts of stardom to the public eye of contention. The Vietnam War was arguably the most defining event of this era, particularly in the Western world. As the war raged on, it sparked massive anti-war protests in the U.S. and abroad. The counterculture movement, fueled by a youth that was disillusioned with traditional values and the establishment, became vocal in its opposition to the war. The images of napalm bombings, injured children, and the rising body count made many question the motives and morality of the conflict. As a prominent figure, Lennon was not immune to these sentiments. His songs, like "Give Peace a Chance," became anthems for this anti-war generation. But the war wasn't the only point of contention. Civil rights movements were gaining momentum, challenging systemic racism and demanding equal rights for all, irrespective of race or color. Events like the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. brought to the fore the deep-rooted racial tensions in the U.S. Concurrently, the feminist movement was advocating for women's rights, pushing back against patriarchal norms, and seeking equal opportunities and recognition. Amid these global events, Lennon's personal world was in tumult as well. The Beatles, once an unbreakable unit, began to show cracks. Their collective vision, which had once produced some of the world's most iconic music, started to diverge. Individual aspirations, business disagreements, and personal disputes culminated in the group's dissolution in 1970. For Lennon, this was not just the end of a musical era, but also a significant personal transition. During this period, Lennon's relationship with Yoko Ono became central to his life. Their partnership was not just romantic, but deeply collaborative. The two immersed themselves in a blend of music, art, and activism. However, their union was not without controversy. Many fans and media outlets, perhaps unfairly, blamed Ono for the Beatles' breakup. Their avant-garde art exhibitions and peace protests, like the famous bed-ins while aimed at promoting peace, were often met with ridicule and skepticism. Musically, this era was transformative for Lennon. Leaving behind the collaborative shelter of the Beatles, he embarked on a solo journey that was introspective and raw. Albums like John Lennon Plastic Ono Band and Imagine showcased his depth as an artist, touching upon themes of love, peace, trauma, and personal demons. The music was a reflection of Lennon's own struggles and his interpretation of the world around him. The Assailant, Mark David Chapman. The tragic end to John Lennon's life was orchestrated by a figure who stands in stark contrast to the artist's legacy. Mark David Chapman, the man responsible for Lennon's assassination, remains one of the most enigmatic figures in the annals of crime. The motivations and psychology behind his act continue to be subjects of discussion, reflection, and bewilderment. Chapman was born in 1955 in Texas and grew up in a turbulent household. His early life was marked by feelings of alienation and instances of emotional turmoil. As a young man, he became a fan of the Beatles, like countless others of his generation. However, over the years, his admiration turned into an obsession, influenced in part by his growing religious beliefs and personal interpretations of literature, especially J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. The protagonist, Holden Caulfield, and his disdain for the phonies of the world resonated deeply with Chapman. By the late 1970s, Chapman's mental state had taken a dark turn. He began to harbor a deep-seated resentment towards celebrities, particularly those he perceived as hypocritical. Lennon, with his messages of peace and love, juxtaposed against his affluent lifestyle, became a focal point of Chapman's growing animosity. In his distorted perspective, Lennon represented the very phoniness that both he and Caulfield despised. The decision to target Lennon wasn't impulsive. Chapman meticulously planned the act. In October 1980, he quit his job, signing out as John Lennon. He then traveled to New York City, intent on carrying out his grim mission. The events of December 8, 1980, are now tragically etched in history. Chapman spent the day outside the Dakota, Lennon's residence. He even encountered Lennon earlier in the day, obtaining an autograph on a record album, a chilling prelude to the evening's events. Later that night, as Lennon returned to his apartment, Chapman approached and fired 5 shots, 4 of which hit Lennon, leading to his untimely death. The aftermath was a mix of shock, sorrow, and an attempt to understand the why behind the act. When apprehended, Chapman showed no intent to flee. He was found reading The Catcher in the Rye, which he later claimed held the explanation for his actions. During his trial, Chapman stated that he believed killing Lennon would elevate him from his feelings of inadequacy and insignificance. Forensic experts and psychologists have since attempted to decipher Chapman's psyche. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, his delusions and warped interpretations of literature and real-world events played a significant role in his actions. He claimed he heard voices, urging him to kill Lennon, and saw himself as a sort of avenger, ridding the world of a perceived pretender. The days leading up to the tragedy. The final days leading up to John Lennon's untimely demise were a mix of routine, creativity, and glimpses of his ongoing commitment to peace and love. These days encapsulate the profound irony of his life's tragic end, as they were marked by expressions of hope, love, and future aspirations. In December 1980, Lennon was living in New York City with Yoko Ono and their young son, Sean. The Dakota, their iconic residence, was a symbol of their life together, a haven of art, music, and family. Lennon had recently returned to the limelight after a self-imposed hiatus from the music industry, during which he had focused on his role as a father and husband. This period of reflection and rejuvenation had borne fruit in the form of a new album, Double Fantasy, which he and Ono had jointly crafted. The album was a testament to their enduring love and partnership, and it carried with it the hopes and dreams of a bright future. Throughout late November and early December, Lennon was engaged in a series of interviews and promotional activities for the new release. In these interactions, he appeared relaxed, happy, and optimistic. He spoke candidly about his past, the lessons he had learned, and his hopes for the coming decade. Lennon seemed to be in a place of contentment, cherishing his role as a father and looking forward to more years of music and activism. During these days, Lennon and Ono were also actively involved in their ongoing campaign for peace. New York City, with its bustling streets and diverse populace, was their canvas. They sent out messages of love and unity, urging the world to imagine a future without war, hatred, or division. This vision was not just restricted to their public persona, it was an integral part of their daily lives. They were often seen walking in Central Park, interacting with fans, and embracing the city that had become their home, the night of the assassination. December 8, 1980 began as any other day in the life of John Lennon. Yet as dusk approached, a series of events unfolded that would culminate in a moment that forever altered the course of music history and left an indelible mark on the hearts of millions worldwide. The day's activities were typical of Lennon's new life in New York City. In the vibrant neighborhood surrounding the Dakota, where Lennon and Yoko Ono resided, the unmistakable buzz of the city filled the air. That day, the couple had participated in various activities, including the aforementioned photo session with Annie Leibovitz and a radio interview that gave fans insight into Lennon's thoughts and aspirations. After fulfilling their professional commitments, John and Yoko decided to head to the record plant studio, a decision that would unknowingly set them on a path to tragedy. As they exited the Dakota in the late afternoon, a small group of fans and admirers, a common sight, awaited them. Among them was Mark David Chapman, who had been loitering around the building for most of the day. Lennon, always gracious to his fans, engaged briefly with Chapman, signing an album for him. This brief, seemingly mundane interaction would take on a sinister significance in just a few hours. The couple spent several hours at the record plant studio, a place where Lennon felt at home and where much of his post-Beatles work had been birthed. Immersed in the creative process, the worries of the world likely seemed miles away. As the clock neared 11 p.m., Lennon and Ono decided to return to their residence. The city's energy had shifted from the hustle of the day to the more subdued ambiance of a New York night. As their limousine pulled up to the Dakota's Gothic facade, the entrance was relatively quiet. The fans and photographers from earlier had mostly dispersed, save for a few lingering individuals. Among the remaining was Chapman, who had waited for hours for another opportunity to encounter Lennon. As John and Yoko stepped out of their vehicle, moving towards the entrance of their sanctuary, Chapman approached. Without uttering a word, he drew a .38 caliber revolver and fired 5 shots in quick succession. 4 of the bullets found their mark, fatally wounding Lennon. The echoing sound of gunfire shattered the night's stillness, and chaos ensued. Ono, in sheer terror and disbelief, screamed for help. Lennon, critically wounded, staggered a few steps before collapsing in the building's vestibule. The Dakota's doorman acted swiftly, apprehending Chapman and ensuring he didn't flee the scene. The police were summoned immediately.